Okay, so I had the Iraq War, and this is just a map of Iraq, so you guys can get a little understanding of it before we delve into the presentation. So the who, what, and wheres of this war. It was the Iraq, the U.S., and even the U.K. got involved, and I'll get to that a little later. And it was a war of disarmament of Iraq's nuclear weapons, and it took place from 2003 to 2011. Some of the major figures throughout this war were Saddam Hussein, as most of you guys know. He was a president, and he was hung in December of 2006 for what he did to the Iraqi people and also the Kurdish people. There's Dick Cheney, who was the vice president of the United States. George Bush was the president of the United States at the time, and David Rumsfeld, who was the U.S. secretary, who played a role. So causes. This war was a result of, like Hannah said, the 9/11 attacks that played a role into it, but also, the U.S. thought that they had weapons of mass destruction, and they also felt that they were supporting Al-Qaeda, which is a terrorist group in the Middle East, which is dangerous to the United States. So, atrocities. This war was it was violent. War is war, but this one was extremely violent just because of the amount of casualties that happened throughout this war. It's estimated that 150,000 to over 1 million Iraqis were dead through the conflict, and that includes civilians. And then about 4,500 U.S. troops died. So with the timeline, April 9th, 2003, the statue of Saddam Hussein was pulled down with the help of Iraqis, and this kind of helped the Iraqis segue into a new chapter of not living in a dictatorship and being independent and breaking away from these traditional ways. December 13th, 2003, Saddam was captured, and this was huge because from there on out he wasn't able to suppress the people and oppress them, and the people kind of had a voice from there on out. And then this guy, Nouri Maliki, was elected prime minister, and this was also big because it was again breaking out of the typical oppression, and there was no dictator, and he was going to be part of the first held elections in Iraq. And so this is just, I threw this in because it was a powerful picture. It just kind of goes to show that this wasn't just a war of adults on adults, children and civilians were involved, and this is where it kind of became an extreme war. So the effects. There was a lot of controversy surrounding the war, much like the Afghanistan war, and it really affected the outlook on Bush as a president because a lot of people agreed with what he did in going to Iraq, and a lot of people also disagreed. So this really, it affected his outlook. And then the cost. The cost of war is obviously extremely great through ammo, guns, transportation, salary, and so it just there was a big toll on the U.S. and people felt it. So I have a clip now kind of going through the Iraq War and the controversy by the numbers, and I think you guys will enjoy this. We get some statistical input.
Broadcasters worldwide covered the 4th anniversary of the U.S.-led war in Iraq. But English-language state-sponsored broadcasters from China, Iran, and Russia focused on the U.S. anti-war movement.
U.S. public support for the Iraqi war has nosedived in 4 years.
Actors Ted Robbins and Matthew Modine were among the demonstrators calling for an end to the war. Meanwhile, anti-war activists in St. Louis, Missouri started a 24-hour vigil.
Anti-war protests are continuing worldwide in the run-up to the 4th anniversary of the US-led invasion of Iraq. Thousands of protesters marched through New York streets. Anti-war demonstrations were also held in Miami, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Oklahoma City, and Oregon.
In the US and England, anniversary news reports found safety in numbers. ABC News and the BBC teamed up to survey Iraqis.
60% say life is bad. That's double the level 2 years ago, when elections made people more hopeful.
Fewer than half the Iraqis, just 42%, said life was better now than it was under Saddam Hussein. Why? The answer is the violence. 80% of Iraqis tell us they have experienced attacks nearby.
While NBC focused on U.S. statistics.
3,218 U.S. troops have been killed. Another 24,042 wounded.
61% of Americans say the United States is losing ground in bringing democracy to Iraq. So far, over 2 million Americans have cycled through Iraq at least once.
The whole world has an opinion about the war. In a major study of 26,000 people in 25 countries done for the BBC this winter, a majority in 21 of the countries surveyed said they disapproved of the U.S. handling of the Iraq war. In France, Argentina, Egypt, Lebanon, and Turkey, the number who disapproved registered 90% or more. In only 3 countries, Kenya, Nigeria, and the Philippines, a majority approved of how the United States has handled the war. The BBC chose to go deeper for the anniversary. They visited Sadr City, the neighborhood of Baghdad where the Shiite Mehdi army militia holds sway.
As we go through the main government checkpoint at the entrance to Sadr City, the Iraqi soldiers who man it leave everything to the Mehdi army. Although the Americans are supposed to have taken over here, it's the Mehdi army which is escorting us back into Sadr City. And the Mehdi army knows very well they're going to be the strongest force left in this country. So if that's the Mehdi army's strategy, the American one seems to be to raise the numbers of troops in Sadr City and other places that are difficult and where there's a lot of violence, tamp down the violence as best they can, and then perhaps late summer or sometime like that, declare a victory and leave.
So that just goes to show how much conflict or how much controversy there really was throughout this whole war. And Bush justified his actions by saying that they had weapons of mass destruction and by saying that they were supporting Al-Qaeda, but no one really knows the real answers to those. So that's my presentation.
Can I ask a question?